A concern for religious education in communities of religious practice is central to the REA. In our core documents, we affirm a commitment to generating scholarship and resources that can help communities of practice educate their members. And we affirm a commitment to generating scholarship and resources that can help communities of practice educate people to carry on the mission of the church within the world. The aim of this plenary, Plenary 2, is to affirm and spark dialogue about new ways of imagining, envisioning these core commitments to nurturing faith within and beyond faith communities. Our moderator for this session is Kathy Winings. Kathy Winings is someone who's known to all of us, but it's always good to just sort of lift up a little bit who key people are in their accomplishments. Kathy is Vice President for Academic Affairs and Professor of Religious Education and Ministry and Director of the Doctor of Ministry program. She wears a lot of different hats at Unification Theological Seminary in Barrytown, New York. Kathy is also Vice President of the Board of Directors for the International Relief Friendship Foundation, an international disaster and humanitarian development agency. As a public speaker, Kathy has addressed audiences around the world on a wide range of educational, ministerial, and social justice topics. The author of numerous academic and pastoral works, her best-known work is perhaps her book, Building Character Through Service Learning. In 2007, Kathy was the recipient of the Harriet Tubman Humanitarian Achievement Award. Welcome, Kathy.
Tom Trotter stated in his book, Loving God with One's Mind, that imagination is a central ingredient in any religious experience. And our own beloved Maria Harris noted that the heart of teaching is imagination. And that's what makes this year's program theme most intriguing. Building on Emily Town's presentation earlier this afternoon, by bringing imagination from the margins to the center of our dialogue and thinking this weekend, I think we're both challenged and encouraged to reimagine our work as religious educators, faith workers, and as individuals as we consider what might be and can be. I'm excited about this plenary this afternoon because the central themes of our two speakers can speak to our imaginations as they challenge us to look at liturgy and ritual anew on the one hand, while also taking the possibility of that resulting personal transformation or renewal to connect with a larger world, so as to see how we might engage people's imaginations to produce compassion, justice, and hope. Sound like a tall order? Let's see. Our two speakers, I'll introduce both of them now, and then Fred will come up first. We'll connect with Nick, and then he'll speak. We'll try to save some time at the end for Q&A as well as for our evaluation work. Many of us in this room know Fred Edie. As a member of REA, you may have met him at one of the annual meetings. You may have attended his research interest group sessions. If you've not had the privilege to meet him, let me fill you in on a few biographical tidbits. Fred Edie is a real Southerner. You know, he grew up only about 4 hours from here in Savannah, actually on the Isle of Hope, I've been told. And I think that's a perfect name considering this weekend's theme. And he did his degree work here in the South. As noted in the program that you have, Fred is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. Youth ministry and religious education has been the focus of much of Fred's work professionally. As an associate professor of the practice of Christian Ed at Duke Divinity School, he has been able to pass on his love of youth ministry in his courses, especially through the Duke Youth Academy. Some of you may be familiar with his book, Bath, Table, and Time, which looked at the academy and how youth ministries can benefit from corporate worship. His research interests include exploring relationships between Christian worship and Christian identity, and creating rich context for the formation of Christians and constructing full-bodied epistemologies. So it makes sense that the focus of his comments in the plenary will focus on imagining the untapped depths of liturgy and ritual. After Fred will come our next speaker, Nick Stuart. He is the president and CEO of Odyssey Network, which you'll hear something about. But if you're not familiar with the brilliant work of Odyssey, I really encourage you to go to their website to browse through some of the titles of their programs and documentaries that they produced. Again, from his brief bio in your packet, you see that he has sought to bridge the divide between broadcast media and religion through his extensive career. For the last 6 years, Nick has run Odyssey Network. If you scan the bio notes that's on the website there for Odyssey, you'll see a most intriguing mix of experiences from quiz shows, such as the American Bible Challenge, which, by the way, was nominated for an Emmy last year, to producing music videos, to working as a reporter. There is a good synergy between Nick and Fred because as the former CEO of CTVC in Britain, he was able to produce TrueTube, an award-winning teen-oriented website. Now you see the connection with Fred, where real-life stories and documentaries are featured in a YouTube-style online platform. It's also reflected in a weekly online package on Scripture and the Bible that combines issues-based video with relevant Scripture commentary. Among Nick's recent productions are Florence Nightingale, spiritual portrait of the founder of the nursing profession, God is Green, as well as Clash of the Worlds. Nick will talk about the challenges of communicating about religion to a multicultural and demanding multimedia society, with an eye toward how the dynamic between modern technology and imagination might just place religion back into the public square while potentially breathing new life into our congregations and individual personal faith, as the congregations and all of us struggle to come to terms with our role in what some might call a post-denominational world. So I'd like to invite Fred up to begin our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you to the president of REA. Thank you to the leadership board for extending me this invitation to contribute to our conversation. My topic is resources for cultivating imagination within faith communities. Such an assignment suggests a lovely banquet of possibilities. The study of sacred texts, mimesis of sacred persons, the wonders of performed or visual arts, the aesthetics of space, and on and on. But I've chosen to focus upon the corporate gatherings of religious communities, what communities call worship or liturgy. I'll try to provide an account of these ritual, symbolic, linguistic practices as at once the fruit of religious imagination and also the seed for religiously imaginative improvisation. As a Christian religious educator, I need to confess that for me, the incarnation, a unique act of divine self-imagining, informs and sanctions what I say about religious imagination, though incarnation will mostly remain something of a subtext in this offering. So, a story. I was making a connecting flight from from Detroit to Grand Rapids. It's supposed to be less than 20 minutes from gate to gate. Only the plane that was to take us there was more than an hour late. And we were already grumpy. When it finally arrived and all of us were tightly packed into this winged can, instead of flying, we started to bake. About 15 minutes after the oven was turned on, the pilot came on the intercom to tell us that the air conditioning was broken, and that we were delayed because they were trying to fix it. So a number of folks suggested that perhaps it would be cooler at 15,000 feet, or maybe outside of that infernal airplane landed in Grand Rapids. But underway at last, the pilot next explained that we would there was a World War II veteran aboard, a former pilot, and he would be honored upon our arrival with a water cannon salute. What is this water cannon salute? I didn't know. It sounded vaguely threatening. We landed, though, and then we taxied over toward the fire station at the airport where 2 fire trucks awaited. As the plane slowly rolled between the trucks, they lofted rainbow-shaped streams of water over top of the plane. It was a baptism unlike any I had ever attended. I'll return to the story in a minute. It offers all kinds of points of reflection upon liturgical imagination, including perhaps the most basic. I mean, why bother with this liturgy at all? Why not just bump the guy up to first class? Give him a double scotch and get the rest of us off the plane 15 minutes earlier and on with our lives. Why bother? But first I want to specify my own use of the term imagination. Maria Harris was certainly correct to observe that imagination is, quote, far too complex a reality to be reduced to mere definition. It is imagination's nature not to pin down. So when tempted to settle for just the standard definition of imagination, the capacity to see in the mind what does not exist in the senses, we readily grant Professor Harris's point. According to this standard definition, imagination is limited to fantasy, or perhaps to the fantastic. It conjures up unicorns, rivers of chocolate, and the state of the union is strong. But as the poets have shown us, imagination may also draw our attention to what exists, but with the purpose of rendering this familiar reality strangely different. Who knew, for example, that fog crept in on little cat's feet before Carl Sandburg let us in on the mystery? So by virtue of its capacity to render the familiar strange, as in this example of Sandburg's enchantment of nature, imagination may also open us to transcendence. At this point, I mean by transcendence only one's sense of being present to or immersed in a project or a community or a cosmos that is somehow more than the sum of its parts, or at least more than is apparent on the surface of things. At the same time, however, if imagination can make the familiar strange and open us to transcendence, it can also make the strange familiar. Imagination brings transcendence close, maybe close enough to taste and see. This dynamic of making the familiar strange and the strange familiar suits my sense of how liturgical performances of symbols and words both require and shape the religious imagination. In liturgy, ordinary things and ordinary practices are made to point beyond themselves to the extraordinary, to a truth or a reality not always self-evident. The water cannon salute, for example, performed and revealed what we might not have been inclined to see in our frazzled state. It performed the transcendent glory of empire and the heroism of those who make supreme sacrifices for it. The liturgy also recruited our loyalties to this empire, or at least our gratitude for sacrifice in its name. In the process, an ordinary man was transformed into an exemplar, maybe a saint, and this was not the only transformation. The rest of us morphed from cranky, self-obsessed mutineers to happy communitarians, at least briefly. All seemed moved by this liturgy. Many took pictures with their phones as the plane passed through the waters, and they applauded the hero loudly. We'll reserve judgment on this liturgy for the time being. So how does liturgy, especially its symbols, work? Victor Turner says that religious symbols gather around themselves a host of meanings, even contradictory ones, and they impact persons affectively. They are felt as much as they are thought. And they also, or their reference, recruit our desires, and through them they depict or imply visions of the good life. Symbols subject to religious ritualizing often derive from the elemental ingredients of life on the planet: earth, wind, water, fire. Though we moderns sit and stand and sleep and eat mostly apart from nature, our ancestors easily recognized that these natural things participated in transcendence. They came to us from beyond ourselves. We might make use of them, but never fully control them. They held the keys to life and death. So water, for example, rains down from above us. It births our crops and sustains them until harvest, and then transports them to market. Water washes away our weariness. It quenches our thirst. It is the primal womb of all life, and then it sustains the life that it births. Or maybe it doesn't. Too much water, or too little water, at the wrong time or in the wrong place leads to suffering, violence, maybe death. Drought precipitates famine. Flooding waters destroy a city or an old man's lungs. So water calms and water terrorizes. Water births and water kills. Water builds and water destroys. Water transports and water contains. Water mixes and water separates, and so on. Religious symbols do this. They are infinitely generative. They are forever suggesting something more. They won't be pinned down. I think this is part of their power to move this. All this makes them iconic. It's what opens us to relationship with powers beyond ourselves. So far I've been talking about religious symbols by way of a mishmash of cultural anthropology and very amateur phenomenology. But through the example of water, I attempted to describe how it may come to function as a religious symbol because of its multiple varying and even contrasting significations of human life. The multivalences of religious symbols also serve to render the familiar strange and the strange familiar. Now I wish to comment briefly on the spoken language of liturgy and the linguistic creations that arise in response to liturgy. The period of Christian antiquity was perhaps the most fertile era for religious imagining in the church. Believing themselves to be compelled by the love of Christ to baptize and make disciples in his name, these patristic mothers and fathers made two inspired imaginative moves. First, they contemplated the baptismal practices themselves, out loud and in writing. Was this a cleansing in water? Was it a drowning? A birthing? A passage from one condition to another? Happily, they concluded the answer was yes. Second, they pored over the scriptural stories of God's saving work in and through Israel. In those stories, they discerned how water flowed like a fugal theme from the very beginnings, the stories of creation, to the liberation of the people from slavery in Egypt, to their provision through the period of wilderness wanderings, to their entry into the promised land. You get the idea here. And of course, the patristics added new chapters about Christ and the church and the kingdom to the kingdom to which these stories point. Their imaginative genius was to link these stories to the multivalent symbolizing power of baptismal waters. Effectively, they immersed converts in all these stories of God's salvation. And without this story symbol linking, here I'm improvising on Anne Wimberly's work, the symbol of water alone could be mistaken for revealing an arbitrary and even capricious God, rather than the one true God whose only power is to love. At the same time, they were okay with the internal contradictions of this imaginative linking. They did not seek to immediately resolve the dissonances of competing narratives that baptism into Christ implied. So baptism was to death as well as to life, to separation and to radical inclusion. It was to newly elevated status as son or daughter of God, and to dismantling old hierarchy that leveraged power unjustly or even violently. So what's going on here is, in fact, paradox. Parker Palmer helpfully describes paradox as the way of knowing that seeks to discern truth in the creative tension of the both and rather than the either or. The patristics were paradoxical people. They sensed its operations in their liturgical symbols and so practiced theologically in elusively paradoxical patterns. Take Ephraim, for example, a 4th century deacon serving in East Syria. And may peace come to this place today. Ephraim wrote volumes of poetry and hymnody, and he's not well known, but he's favorably compared with Dante. Listen to his paradoxical verse. Blessed be the shepherd who became a lamb for our reconcilement. Blessed be the branch who became a cup of our redemption. Blessed also be the tiller who became wheat, that he might be sown, and a sheaf, that he might be cut. And consider these baptismal verses Ephraim places on the lips of Mary. The Son of the Most High came and dwelt in me, and I became his mother. Just as I gave birth to him, a further birth, so too did he give birth to me, a second birth. He put on his mother's robe, her body, while I put on his glory. This conjoining of contrasting metaphors Mary's mother, Mary's daughter, the Son is born, the Son gives birth. Besides immersing us in the sublime beauty of paradox, functions at once to reveal God and to preserve the ultimate ineffability of God. It is, once again, making the strange familiar while making the familiar strange. Though liturgical language does more to specify God's identity than liturgical symbols alone, this language shares with ritual symbols the creative dissonance of polyvalence. God is the impossible possibility, the one who dwells in the midst of death and life, the one, for Christians, who mingles divinity with humanity, the one who remains at a distance while nuzzling our necks. Practicing paradox also recruits wonder from human subjects at the mystery of God, and it recruits humility in the recognition that A, we are so not God, and B, we are dependent upon God. In other words, this way of imagining seeks to orient our desires by tempering our arrogance, our tendencies to self-justification, or temptations to demonize the other, and instead to orient our loves toward their proper ends. Finally, you can't place a period after a paradox. The nature of paradox, to open instead of to foreclose, is to generate more imagining. Sally McFague did just this by fashioning new metaphors in relation to God, the earth as God's body, for example. So did James Cone in his juxtaposition of the cross with the lynching tree. Might we also take to describing Earth's threatened oceans as the baptismal womb of all creation, in the land as our sibling? Paradoxical imagination, by its nature, will continue. This is good news, for we, people of faith, desperately need to offer a vision of the world other than it is at present, one not flattened by univocal claims. May the awareness that religion has always proceeded by way of imagining, and that, in my tradition at least, redemption comes as a gift of divine imagination, may that urge us along the way. Thank you.
Fred brought a conversation from within the faith communities. Nick is now going to take our conversation outside to the wider community in this conversation.
Kathy, thanks very much. And first of all, a great thank you to Bud and the committee for inviting me, because as you probably heard, I'm not an educator. But this is rather special to me to be invited here, because my partner is an educator. So he's an assistant professor at Fordham. And I know there are a few Fordham people here. Hands up from Fordham. Go Fordham. You are my adopted family. I feel I belong now, as opposed to an outside broadcaster. Now, how about this? For 30 years, I have been paid to imagine. Isn't that amazing? And in many ways, you are as well. It's a fantastic position for us. It's a blessed position for us to be in. My son-in-law is a tree surgeon. Now, if you told a small boy that he would be paid when he grew up to climb trees, he would have bitten your hand off. If you told me, who always loved telling stories as a boy and reading stories, I would be paid to imagine. And my imagining could actually help create a better and more just and more hopeful world. Well, wow, I would have taken it then and there. And we are in positions to do that. So we are in an amazing situation, and the technology is helping us even more. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about that as the conversation goes on. Now, sometimes, as you know with imagination, it can hit and be a success, and sometimes it really bombs. I think the lesson I've learned from that is never give up imagining, take the rough with the smooth. As Kathy mentioned, I was lucky enough when I first made a move from broadcasting into education. The team, first time out of the blocks, won Britain's top award for education, the Innovation Award. But then I also created a religious comedy quiz show. I don't know if anyone's from Britain here, but does Channel 5 mean anything to anybody here? Let's just say the Spice Girls opened Channel 5. And when my company was asked to do its religious programming, I thought, boy, what do we do? So I came up with a religious comedy quiz show, for which the Daily Telegraph, a very conservative newspaper in Britain, I still have this review in my bathroom, says, whoever came up with this idea should burn. I'm not quite sure which one I'm more proud of, actually. But, there are successes and there are failures, and you must take them equally. So in many ways, what is someone who makes religious comedy quiz shows, amongst other things, and spent a lot of his career chasing broadcasting ratings doing here? What have I got to share with you which might be useful? Well, I actually think quite a lot. We have, in many ways, at its heart, a similar challenge. There is something we both feel intrinsically that is so special, so important, that we want to share that, and not just share it, but share it effectively, to make sure that whether it's the viewers or the students, they understand. More than that, they're actually moved by it, they're moved perhaps to change attitudes. That's the wonderful effect which teaching can have. When my partner comes home and she talks about a lecture she's done or a tutorial, and I go, wow, I envy you that. You're sitting in front of somebody and you see the light come on, and they get it, and you know their life will not be the same again. Now, hopefully, with television programs that I make, it'll have that effect. You don't actually get to see the viewers, but you just hope and pray that the light is going on there somewhere. But the most important thing is about how we impart this understanding and this passion. We have to kindle that flame, and when it happens, it is the best feeling. Now, of course, it's helped me in the programs I've made that they've been about religion and about ethics. I started off as a news reporter, and I did a lot of current affairs. And in the late 80s, I was in the right place at the right time. The television network that I was working for had brought me in to cover religion and news. They wanted a whole new way to do religious programming. The end of the 80s was an amazing time. It was the end of the troubles in Northern Ireland were still going on, but heading towards, we felt, a resolution. It was the rise of Hamas in the Middle East. It was the end of apartheid. It was the end of communism. And religion in all those stories played a crucial part. And so suddenly there was a coming together at that moment of religion and current affairs and news issues. So, to me, a trainee journalist who suddenly got a break because he had a theology degree was just, thank you God. It was just such an important moment. But thinking back, as I said, I did a theology degree. And in terms of imagination, there are all sorts of aspects to imagination. And I remember coming out of my degree in theology and philosophy and someone saying to me, so what are you going to do with that? You're going to be a priest? And I went, no. And they said, so you're going to be a teacher? And I went, no. So they said, but what else can you do with a theology degree? And to be honest, I wasn't sure. I just knew that I wanted to make programs, radio, TV. I didn't have the skills to be a teacher or a priest, but I felt I had something to tell in the area of storytelling. Now, in those days, back in the mid-80s, imagination hadn't really knocked on the door of religious broadcasting from what I can remember. I was at a network It was the largest independent television company in the world at that stage, Thames Television, the ITV network in the UK. And they put me in the religious affairs department to make a programme. It was known as the department where you went to die in Thames. It was where imagination went to die. It was very traditional, very respectful, didn't frighten the horses, didn't challenge, but it ticked a lot of boxes and people felt that's what religious programming should do and Britain will benefit from it in some way. I have to say my theology degree was also where you went to die of teaching. I'm afraid imagination hadn't really struck then either. But look at us now. What you're doing, what I've heard from Fred and others, wow, I wish I'd had you as teachers at my theology degree. And the programming I've been allowed to do and that we are continuing to do, and I see bubbling up, just takes religion and brings it out of the morgue and really into the spotlight. So I'm going to show you 3 videos. 4 if we have time, and you're good. They all use a thought process which we as communicators, whether to students or a broadcast audience, share, or we should do. We both want to get across something that's very important to us. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we do that effectively? One of the things for me growing up in Britain, and remember, I don't know if people have heard this, but it's been alleged that Britain is a post-religious society. It's not, but it is very hard for religion to get its voice in the public square. It's seen as, or was, uncool and somehow a bit countercultural, and why should we listen? It always intrigued me that in America you couldn't get elected unless you talked about belief in God. But in Britain, if you talked about your faith, you would not get elected. Tony Blair, actually interestingly, was Britain's, I think, most religious figure, at least fascinated by religion, since William Gladstone in the 19th century. Nobody was allowed to touch that because it was perceived to be death to his political career. There was a famous statement by Alistair Campbell, his press officer when Blair first came to office. He said, in answer to a question about Blair's faith, "We don't do God." Times have changed a bit, but still not enough for Campbell to talk about his faith, if he has one. So anyway, the issue for us is relevancy. I didn't want something that I believed passionately in and felt my country, my society, my friends, people I met could benefit from insights. But I had to find a way to make it relevant to people, how I could get it into the public square. And storytelling is probably the most effective way humankind has ever discovered to impart that sort of information. So telling stories imaginatively was a task I had. Now, here comes the tricky bit. This is where I have to shut things down. This is where you pray for me. Ooh.
You don't have to save it.
I don't have to save. Okay, let's put that one away. Talk amongst yourselves. That's interesting. I have people to do this, you know. But now I have to do it myself. This is good. Now, we're getting there. If I hit the wrong one, you get my children's birthday videos. Okay. What are we getting? Okay, the first video. This clip comes from a 2-part series on Islam in America, which I made for Al Jazeera about 8 years ago. It's just a few years after 9/11. And the task really was to see how we could break through that mistrust and hatred that was beginning to grow out of 9/11. Actually, more than beginning to grow, it was there. What I thought about really was, what do people feel comfortable with. What do they like on television? They like journeys. They like travelogues, journeying through America. It needs a presenter. I brought in one of Britain's top news reporters. His name's Raghi Omar. He was born in Mogadishu. He's a Muslim. He was the perfect figure to bring in as an outsider to look in on Islam in America. And the story we found, and the one we wanted to tell, was that Islam wasn't something that landed in America in the 70s and then really just went off the charts in 9/11, but it had always been part of the fabric of America, in its DNA. I mean, who here knows that Jefferson had a Quran, that Keith Ellison, the first Muslim congressman, swore his oath of office on that Quran. That in the mosaics, in the dome, I think it's the Library of Congress, you've got Aristotle, we had Aristotle earlier. In the first plenary session, we have Aristotle, we have Plato, we have Aquinas, and we have Mohammed. Now, it's right there in the heart of the American Constitution. So that was what we wanted, and if I can get this working, this is a 3-minute clip from that documentary.
I'm in Fayetteville, Arkansas, population 60,000, and it's exactly how I imagine small-town America to be. But what's drawn me here is the story of how this town's tiny Jewish community had a problem which a Palestinian Muslim is helping them to solve.
This is the site of a building no one thought would be built, but two small communities of Jews and Muslims drew their resources together to build a synagogue in the Bible Belt.
Raghi, how are you? Very nice to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. This is a fun. I'd come and pray here. This setting is gorgeous. But when I first heard about this project, I have to say, Palestinian guy building a synagogue in Fayetteville, I thought, what is the story? I mean, did you think it was a weird thing? Were you suspicious at first?
I wasn't suspicious. I just thought we all thought it was just really wonderful. And I think part of it is that we're in a relatively small community.
What sparked in you, Fathom, to think, I've got to help the Jewish community here?
It sparked in me the ancestry of our relationship, being descendants of the same forefather, Abraham. And I thought, this day and age, we really need to reach out to our Jewish brothers in this community and build some bridges.
You two look like you could be cousins.
Except he's lighter than me. He's got blue eyes.
How do you think this project will change how the communities come together and respect each other's cultures and religions?
This year we've had several different programs that for us to understand Islam, and so it's been very exciting for us to be able to embrace someone that has the stereotype of being an adversary. And yet, when this country talks that, we have so much diversity here in the United States. It's a unique country. Our Constitution guarantees us freedoms and freedom of religion, especially, and we taught to respect each other.
In the 30 years that Farrell has been in America, he's gone from being an impoverished engineering student to a multi-millionaire. He really is well connected throughout Arkansas. He's even got a school named after him. And Farrell's helped me realize a lifetime's ambition. He's given me complimentary tickets to the Rodeo of the Ozarks, the 5th biggest rodeo show in all of America. Amazingly, Farrell even has a say in what happens here.
What do you make of the fact that a Palestinian-born American is on the organizing committee of this event? I don't know what could possibly prove to you or me that there is nowhere in America or American culture that Islam can't be assimilated into. And yeehaw to that.
That actually proved to be a remarkably successful video. The American government has put a copy of that documentary, I think, in every embassy in the world, certainly where Muslim countries are, which is really intriguing because I think you can get it on YouTube, I'm not sure these days, one of the online services, but there's a position with the Muslim chaplain from Guantanamo who was actually imprisoned and charged, and then charges were dropped. And he was very critical of all that. So there was a lot that was critical of the American government in there, but, you know, kudos to them, they put the whole thing in. So, you know, the question really, I guess now is what are the teachable moments from that? I mean, clearly it got from the grassroots, from people of faith working together, onto Al Jazeera, onto British network television, across the states, and into every American embassy on the planet. Great, you know, part one of the task achieved. We pulled it out of the faith realm and put it bang into the spotlight in the middle of the public square. But you've got to do something with it when it's there. And you know, what we found is people have been taking extracts of that and using it in classrooms. To me, it's a story which crops up again and again. It's the other, how we look at the other, how we define ourselves. We had two human beings of faith standing next to each other, helping each other out. If they were defining themselves purely by doctrine, by dogma, they might not have really got that close together, but there was something human which resonated with them both, and something as spiritual beings that resonated with them both. So, you know, possibly that is a teachable moment out of that piece. But as I say, that's the sort of challenge that you get. Imaginative challenge to create, imaginative challenge to find a way to get it out there, and then the imaginative challenge to use it in imaginative ways. There's so many layers to this imagination. Now, I'm going to play another video now. These videos are coming thick and fast, so if we want to serve the popcorn now, that'd be fine. This one was mentioned earlier on Scripture, the Bible. Now, this isn't a broadcast piece. This is really an online, weekly, free resource. It started off as a resource for preachers. And I had wanted to get over this irrelevancy thing that I keep going on about. Many's the time I've sat, as I'm sure you have, in church, and the pastors got up and they started to preach, and they've tried to make it interesting, and they've started off by sort of talking to you about, I don't know, Brad Pitt or something, or a film that's just made the box office. And then there's the segue, and they go, you know, our Lord is something like that. And you want to go, no, he's not. That's awful. You know, that segue, I mean, I know what they're trying to do, but for goodness sake. So what I wanted to do was basically link the scripture of that week with an insight into a news story. When people come to sit down in those pews, wouldn't it be wonderful, I thought, if the sermon and the scripture resonated with them because they'd heard on that radio or the front page of the New York Times or whatever it was that morning on the way to church, the story the preacher is now preaching about. And more than that, it's the scripture that's just been read which is casting a new light onto that topic. Again, giving people a chance to actually see insights of faith into the public square. Now, this goes up every week. It goes up on Huffington Post and various other places. It has three components. It has the video, a 3-minute video about the news story. It has the scripture. We use the common lectionary, so we know what will be read. And we work with top scholars biblical scholars across the US to write a 1,000-word biblical commentary, joining up the scripture and the video. This is the video that we had from this one. There was readings about what it is to be a prophet. And this is the story of a man in Florida who was risking imprisonment for defying the city council on setting up a feeding station and kitchen for the homeless on the beachfront.
He comes out here for like 24 years now, every Wednesday on the beach and feeds us. Best food ever. I mean, it's gourmet, great good food.
If anybody can prepare a decent meal the way that it should be presented to people, Mr. Abbott is the guy.
I started in 1991 when I lost my beautiful wife, Maureen. And Maureen, the name of our organization is Maureen A. Abbott Love Thy Neighbor Fund. It's in her name. Everything we do is in her name. She was the best human
Stroud 2.5 years ago came into my office and walked in and said, I just lost my kitchen. I had no place to cook, and I heard you have a kitchen. And it's like, well, of course we have a place for you. Of course we do. And we've had a great relationship ever since.
We've been doing it for 23 years. We started on the beach, we're still on the beach. Still scares me to think of how many pans of food we put out. This is nothing. We have put out 5 times that amount of food every day. So we've done what we could to cooperate with the city, and they've done whatever they could to make life miserable for us and anybody else who feeds the homeless. Simple as that.
One of the issues that the city keeps bringing up, they keep saying things like, well, why can't you feed them at this other church or this other place? And the problem is that homeless don't have cars. Homeless are injured. The beach is a great place for a homeless person to try to survive. It allows them to take that next step of maybe getting back up on their feet, maybe getting some extra help, but at least until they make that next step, until they find that next, they're at least fed and they're at least taken care of, and it's at least safe. The cooking starts on Monday, where everything is purchased and brought back in. On Tuesday, we start preparing the food and put into freezers at that point. And then on Wednesday, we come in, get things warm, things put into the warmers, and load the truck up and head down for feeding. And the same thing we do on Sunday.
We did our work, we did our cooking, and we're ready to go. All right, everybody, Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us this time to meet together once again in an atmosphere of mutual respect and compassion and fellowship each with the other. We are all equal. Nobody is better than anybody else. We are all your children. We should love each other and be good to each other because that is your will. We have 3 entrees. We have tilapia. We have a beautiful ham and red cabbage dish.
I really appreciate the fact that Arnold does what he does. I walk down the beach and I have a meal free, and a very nice meal, I must tell you.
It's not too many people do things like that.
Delicious. It's the best meal of the week.
It's really good.
It's not only the homeless people. Anybody can come and eat. Anybody.
The ordinance went into effect on October 31st, Halloween, and immediately that Sunday, we started feeding. And at that point, the city police were there, lights blazing, ready to arrest us. They did not handcuff us. I don't think they wanted that photograph, but they did cite us, and the police were embarrassed.
The police treated me extremely gently. I had no fear of putting me in jail. Make me stop. Bullet right back here would help for 1 year. I'm not going to stop. I promise as long as there's breath in my body, I'll continue to fight. I fought for the underdog all my life. I think it's the brotherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. I believe that we're all brothers and sisters, all of us. I am my brother's keeper, and whatever little time I have left, I intend to keep that up.
Now that's a story that went national, it had at its heart a wonderful individual. Stories you need someone to really relate to and root for, and you certainly rooted for that guy. So in itself, it's a useful video. But on Scripture, the Bible, we use it more. As I said, it was there to help preachers write their sermons. On a piece, on readings of Scripture in the service, which were about the prophets. So what Eric Barreto, who was the writer that week, professor of New Testament at Luther Seminary, what he did was ask, rather imaginatively, what is a modern prophet? When I did theology back in the day, before imagination was born, the prophets were weirdos. They were bearded people in rags who ran around in deserts and did things which I just had no way to identify with or really understand. What we have here was a moment where Eric took this video and took the Scripture and said, okay, imagine. Let's look at what prophecy really means. What is it to be a prophet? And he threw it to to the congregation, in effect, as you could throw it to students and say, look around, who's a prophet to you in your life? And there's one. And that was how On Scripture used the video in the particular relation to the text. It's not just a two-way thing. Last thing to say on this before the final video, it's not a one-way street, rather. It's not the teacher imparting to the student. Eric from Luther Seminary said something to me which I think is one of the most powerful pieces I've heard about on Scripture, the Bible. He said, all my life I have studied the Bible. The New Testament I know pretty well. I thought I knew these passages. But when you asked me to look at them in the light of videos like that, I saw new colours, new context, new meaning. Things that I thought I would never see. So it's a two-way street. In imagining how you present things, you internally get to grow as well. Now, talking of imagination, I'm going to lighten the mood in a way with a final video. One thing I've learned, especially being in broadcasting for a mainstream audience, is that you don't hit them front on, especially with issues to do with religion. Some of the most useful ways to do it are come at things obliquely. And for me, things like popular culture have been great vehicles. Sport, music. I did a contemporary Christian music show at MTV in England, if you can imagine that, which ran for 4 years. Sport. I love sport. We've done programs about that. You probably all know sportsmen and women of faith. But sport is really at the heart of this particular story. Before I actually bring it up, are there any Yankees fans in the room? Oh, come on, there's got to be one. Are there any Red Sox fans in the room? Okay, you will understand about this video, and might I suggest maybe you separate yourselves from each other in the room. Here goes.
I'm here at Yankee Stadium today trying to get Red Sox and Yankees fans to reconcile.
There is no reconciliation. Yankees and Red Sox have hated each other for years. And the way things have been going, they're going to keep hating each other.
When I was 5 years old, my father took me to my first Red Sox game, and he says to me, over there, do you know who that is? I said, yeah, the Yankees. My father says, you're going to hate them until the day you die.
How do you guys know each other?
This is my stepdaughter.
Your stepdaughter?
I told her she couldn't get into my truck with this on, but...
But you let her in.
Yeah, well, you know, she's got the tickets.
Is there any way Yankees fans and Red Sox fans can reconcile?
No.
You sure?
Yes.
If you're a Yankees fan, you can't like the Red Sox.
That's right. That's right.
True?
It's true.
There's no leeway there at all?
Not really.
There's nothing that can be done?
No.
What if Red Sox fans were to change their attitude?
No.
No?
Yankee hate goes very deep. Even when we don't play the Yankees, people are chanting all kinds of nasty things.
What is it that bothers you about Red Sox fans?
Roots Yankee fans and roots people and
Arrogant. I root for two teams, the Red Sox and whoever plays the Yankees.
In the spirit of good sportsmanship, can I get you guys to put these on for me? So you let that man influence your decision? Can you switch hats?
No.
I think the healing will begin.
There's no healing here.
This is a logo of evil right here.
You're not putting the Yankees hat on?
No.
And you're not putting the Red Sox hat on?
Absolutely not.
Can you say one nice thing about the Yankees or Yankees fans?
It gets us here together.
One nice thing about the Red Sox is you guys have real good coaching. The one nice thing about the Yankees, you have the 27 World Championships.
Nice. Reconciliation.
Deep down, it's a fun thing. It's a fun passion. If you're into baseball, it's a really cool rivalry. And it's never going to change.
This is New England clam chowder. They eat this in Boston and they love it. This is New York cheesecake.
You got a better deal.
Are we having fun now? Red Sox and Yankees fans sharing a snack. You got a little piece of New York right there, a little piece of Boston right there. Soon to be enjoying getting together. A little hug would be nice. Come on, guys.
No loogies.
All right.
I'll take that.
The healing is beginning.
Okay, it's got a long way to go, but it's beginning. I mean, the point of that really is, you know, again, the teachable moments. Issues of tribal identity, the other. Why is it we hate? What is it about them? You know, and you can approach that through sport in a way that if I went onto the streets of Gaza or onto the streets of West or East Jerusalem or East or West Belfast and asked about tribal identity based around Catholic Protestant or Jewish Muslim, well, first of all, I might not get out. And I was stationed in all those places and know what it's like. But if I had even got that program and taken it to the BBC or ABC or CNN or wherever, it would have got played, but would it have got prime time? Would it have got a huge number of hits? That video is the most successful video Odyssey Networks has ever done in 25 years. It's had literally millions of hits online. So again, that is the issue of imagination. How can we approach truths obliquely and serve them up in a manner that won't get in the way, but actually will bring people together and start in a safe space to start exploring these very contentious but important issues. I hope these videos really have shown you the approaches that can be used, inspired by people of faith, about people of faith, to then get into the public square, whether it be through Raggy Omar's journey across America, looking at Islam in America, you know, or that wonderful chap in Florida who was risking really imprisonment for something he believed in so prophetically. Together, it shows that, you know, as educators, as broadcast producer, we can think imaginatively to get across these truths and inspire our students and inspire our viewers. To dream that the world perhaps is a better place than some people want you to believe it is, and also to believe that it can be an even better place than it is. I think, as I started off by saying, we share a lot in common, you as educators, me as a producer, because I think we both, through what we do, provide prophetic witness. Thank you very much.
Nice thing is we have some time for Q&A or comments. I ask that you keep your comments, questions concise, so we try to get in as many responses as we can for our speakers. And then at the end of Q&A, what we'll do is we'll have a few minutes also for Nick to talk a little bit just about Odyssey Network, and then we'll do our evaluations. So microphones are here. Questions, comments for our speakers.
Thank you. This was a fabulous session. Both presentations were just wonderful. Thank you. My question is, do we generate more through religious symbols or through visuals and narratives on the screen? Do we generate more possibilities of imagination by cracking open our normal ways of thinking? So I'm going to try to say this really, really fast. So Fred, I'm going to ask a picky question, which is not meant to be picky, because your presentation was beautiful. You tended to present everything in twos. So baptism is to life or to death, and to death. So is it possible that if you did threes or fours, you might open imagination even more? And then I think that an example might be the small town in Arkansas, where the Jewish and Muslim people could be alienated and fearful of one another, or they could get along, which you presented. But there's also the possibility that they could enjoy the rodeo together. So you add a third dimension. And in a sense, you crack open our normal ways of patterns of thinking in twos, which sets us up to do either or.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth. I found myself feeling some ambiguity about the pairs because I don't see, for example, baptismal possibilities in only pairs. There are as many possibilities for the way in which baptism functions as there are possibilities for the meanings of water. So, if I inadvertently turned paradox into binaries, that was not my intent. I certainly agree.
I know that, and that's why I asked the question, because I know you're thinking much further than that. So.
And no, I really appreciate that question because, again, what you saw was a little clip of 2 one-hour documentaries, and you think, well, either they're enemies or they're pals. And life is more nuanced than that. And that, to a producer, is actually where it gets really interesting. You can paint in big, bold brushstrokes, but we didn't actually. I don't think the Jewish gentleman went along to the rodeo, but thinking about other stories where I've tried to explore this, there was one which actually didn't come off, but we couldn't get the access in the end. But there was a Jewish radio station and a Muslim radio station in Britain, and they inhabited the same building. So you would see them trying to cover the same international stories from opposing positions, and then nipping outside, have a cigarette together and going, well, how's your news day? And, at one level, they were pals. They were journalists struggling with daily journalist tasks. They were not enemies. But then, from their particular standpoint of their newsrooms, they became diametrically opposed. So I agree. I think binary can be useful for a big, clear point, but life isn't like that. And it's in the nuances, I think, where it really is being human. Okay, can I add something about, there's a question over there. I was coming to this.
Hi, Larry Gordon from Andrews University. I have a question for you, Nick. You kept saying that you're not a religious educator. I can't help but wonder, because I'm a curriculum theorist kind of guy, isn't anytime that we produce a video or something else to be consumed by popular culture, aren't we actually enacting some type of pedagogy? Aren't we actually putting something out there that we expect will change someone in some way that will actually help them learn? There's an objective behind it, just like our lessons, things like that.
I think that's a very acute observation. In fact, you sort of caught me there, because I remember in my head thinking, well, what should I say when I get to the podium? And I heard myself saying that in rehearsal, and I thought, I wonder if anyone will pick me up on that, because actually, again, going back to this binary thing, am I a producer or am I a religious educator? And I can't be both. Well, I can be both, and I actually do, in a way, see myself as both. And in the way that you might perceive in the priesthood, and in the priesthood of everyone, and how we have different callings in what we do, I think you're right. If anyone actually communicates through their actions, their deeds, their videos, or whatever it is, even through music, then they are a religious educator. Just very quickly, I was at a conference many years ago in the UK, religious broadcasters, and there was somebody from Aberdeen University. He was asked, what is the future of the church? And he said, I'll tell you a story. He said, basically, 17-year-old from Manchester, prostitution, drugs, life is just about to go. She'll go to prison. erect, and she certainly had the wherewithal to stop and go, who do I want to be like? And she thought about the people that she knew, and there was a young couple who invited her to church. And she went along, and her life is very different now. She didn't know in her question what she was looking for in terms of ontological belief or salvific theology. She just knew that these people, by their actions, ordinary actions, had been religious educators. And that's so, I think the point's well made.
See, Nick, we want to claim you as a religious educator. If you want to move beyond that, thank you. Nick, redo the video with Red Sox, the Yankees, and add a mess.
Hi, I'm Mary Ellen Durante, and my interest is in children and prayer and becoming contributors to a healthier world through imagination. So I just wanted to ask the two of you, were there any key pivotal experiences that you had as children that made you who you are today?
You mean the good part of me? So when I was very young, one of my earliest religious memories, or sense that there was something more to out there, was that our family was hosting the lighting of the Advent wreath during one of the Sundays in Lent. And so a bunch of folks from church came to our house, and you know, my mom had been drilling me about how to hold this to light the candle, you know, and which one's the light, and don't light that one. And so I had a little bit of holy fear, and when the moment came, it was mystical. And I think, I mean, I've always had sort of an aesthetic sense about things, and I think that's testimony that it went away fast.
You know, that's a very powerful image, and I bet, Fred, that's really clear in your mind in HD 1080p full resolution. I've been TV too long. But you know, when memories like that, you think back to childhood moments, and they're little snapshots, little scenes, 10 frames from a life or whatever. And that's a great one. And I have one which comes completely out of nowhere. I don't know where it is, where it's from, why. I must have been 7. I was with a group of 3 or 4 other boys, I can't remember their names. And one of them said, "Do you believe in God?" And my family didn't go to church. I've never been to church. You know what this was about? And I found myself almost teaching. I said yes, and I don't know what happened after that, if they hit me or if they converted or whatever they did. I mean, the memory stops there. But the intensity of that moment of giving witness to something that had not been expressed to me, but was something innate, maybe it did.
Could I say one more thing? So it's something about being sanctioned to play with fire, and there's something luminous. I mean, that I felt like I was in the midst of something more.
Do we have time for one more?
One more, and then we'll hear a little bit about Modest Network.
I'll add my thanks to the thanks that have already been expressed through the presentations. I'm Amanda Pittman. I suppose I should start with that. Nick, you talked a little bit about indirection in how you see the efficacy of the videos that you're producing, and I'm thinking again and still about indirection and imagination. And it seems to me also, Fred, that as opposed to something like a proposition, that symbol is also a form of indirection. And I wondered if you had any further thoughts about the relationship between that which is oblique, or that which Emily Dickinson might tell us is telling its slant, and the formation of the imagination.
I mean, I think, you know, for some, I describe what I do almost as Trojan horses. You know, I think we go back to the idea that there is something that we as individuals feel is extremely important. And yet, as I said earlier, the religious department at Thames Television was the place you went to die, and it would get the worst slots, and it used to annoy me intensely. And, you know, I think there was a poll done in the UK, I think about 10 years ago, do you believe in God? And I think it was surprisingly high, it was about 70% of somebody in the UK said yes. They then asked the same question at the Television Producers Conference in Edinburgh. 34% believed. It's difficult to get religion across into the public square, especially when it seems sometimes the dice are loaded against you. That's a negative reason for coming obliquely, but it's a very real reason as well. But I also think that you grow dynamically, and your faith is more alive and alert and creative if you do approach things obliquely. The danger is always that you accept. It was always like this. You sit there as sponges and you accept. This is the way you look at it. And I think finding that life and faith didn't have to be like that was one of the most liberating things, I think, in my life and my faith, personal faith.
So, I spent the afternoon ixnaying, trying to get down to the time limit. And one of the things I took out was the comment that I'm sure many of you know from Amy Dillard about the nature of worship, that Christians at least often enter the sanctuary so casually they're more concerned about what hats they're going to wear, and when in fact they're cooking up a bomb to kill a Sunday morning. So it's not the nature of religious symbols to knock you upside the head. They invite, they don't compel. And they're so ordinary that we don't necessarily even notice. But that's also what makes them potentially extraordinary. And I just think that dwelling in that tension is an important place for religious people to be.
We want to show our appreciation to Nick and Fred for their comments this afternoon.